You listening up actively? Tuned in to what I've got going on for you today. So, Yash and Jack, you should definitely not be doing what you're doing on your phones currently. Rayvon, if you could put yours away as well. Kaden, I don't know if you have yours, but it looks like it's who else? Okay, in the back, I can still see phones. Put them away, please. I don't need much time. Active listening, spending the energy. That's all I'm looking for. Okay, so I mentioned yesterday that today we would be getting into some topics that might be a little uncomfortable, and you can see all of them linked here. I just want to preface this by saying, remember, these are things that are not personal. They're not things that you are doing even intentionally, if you're doing them at all. Sometimes it is just part of the world that we live in that we don't see all the time. And so I'm bringing light, or I'm not bringing light, but it is important to bring light to these types of things, societal norms. I want to disclaim too, before we get into this, just because something is a societal norm, Garen, can you put your phone away, please? Just because something is a norm, something that happens in our society, it does not make it right or okay necessarily. This is not, or not even necessarily. This is not condoning these behaviors. This is not enabling them. None of that. Just because it's a norm does not mean it is right or okay necessarily. So something that is really important to understand when you're communicating, when you're connecting with people of a variety of different perspectives, positions, life experiences, upbringings, all different types of words for how they've lived their life so far. Every one of us, and this is not a strictly negative thing, but every one of us has a bias. Every one of us has been raised in a certain culture, has been raised in a certain level of wealth, has been raised in a certain region, certain area. All of these different aspects of your life are going to give you a bias of some kind. That is okay. It's natural. It's the way the human brain works. It's the way that language flows. It's the way that things happen, just kind of in our society thus far. The important part gets into when you identify how your bias is negatively affecting other people around you. So like, I'm an example of a positive bias. I like science fiction. It's just something I enjoy, right? So if I go to a bad sci-fi movie that if you don't like sci-fi, you're going to like way less than me because I have that bias of enjoying something that's science fiction based. It just influences how you see the world. But drawing attention to it, oh, what? It's worked. This literally worked the other day. Okay, that's frustrating. So we'll do this live. Identifying. Because your brain is a funny thing sometimes. Let's check out this one. University of Wisconsin. This is heady. Okay, that's Scholarly Journal. Man, this really did not do what I needed it to do. Let's check this one out. No, that's not what I'm looking for. Okay, well, we'll just go to this link instead. This is one that I had for later. Just when you start to think about the things that have influenced your life, those are parts of your experience that you take as just being part of your experience, right? It's nothing you could have done to affect the way that you were raised from when you couldn't support yourself as babies, as newborns and stuff like that. The important part comes into understanding how your upbringing can give you distinct advantages or disadvantages, depending on what the culture that you grew up in, how you'll end up. So by taking a second to kind of think about how you grew up, that opens the door to more empathetic conversations, more levels of understanding with people of other groups, of other distinctions, whether they are different from you, the same as you. By becoming aware of your biases, as the multiple for bias, your communication flows a lot more freely and a lot more respectfully. A lot of the things that have to do with some of our unconscious biases, some of the things that we've not really aware that we're doing. I'm guilty of this too. Everybody is. Like I mentioned, it's a human thing. But by spending a little bit of energy, spending that active listening energy to think about how the way you grew up and the people you work with and the people that you associate with, how that affects your view, that is a really, really crucial thing that carries you into adulthood. That is one of the beauties of being an adult and being a high schooler now. You guys are exposed to a huge variety of different people, different backgrounds, different cultures, different exciting things, right? So it's not too early to start thinking about how your biases can affect your viewpoint. And so just this step number one is you have them. It is okay to have them. What's not okay is to perpetrate the bad ones. So as you can imagine, there is some very negative ways that you can be biased against certain groups of people. Racism is an example, sexism is an example, ableism is an example. Those are the big ones. I'm not saying that you are built in with those, but those are the extreme case that you need to acknowledge that they are there. And then the second half, this is the part that takes the energy, like the active listening, is the educating yourself to do better. This article talks a lot about unconscious biases. These are the ones that I'm mentioning, the ones that you're not thinking about. These are the ones that you've grown up with, the ones that are just a part of who you are, not negative, but they are there. And so giving them a name and being aware of them helps you be more empathetic, be more understanding, and be a more effective communicator in your world. So there's lots of things on here. Biases are usually going to affect how you assume things are going to happen too. So let's see, how can I explain this, right? Biases form assumptions. Biases basically, and I'll get off of biases here in a second. They create the way that you're going to default and assume on the world. And recognizing that that assumption is based on something that's exclusive to you or exclusive to some other people, or not some other people, people of other groups, people of other distinctions, or your same distinction. Those assumptions can get dangerous if you're running with groups or you find yourself noticing that these assumptions are painting other groups in negative lights. These assumptions are making yourself feel bad. All of these are, by recognizing that you have an unconscious bias, you're going to start to be able to unpack the world that we live in. And that is part of growing up, part of being an adult, part of communicating is you have to learn, how you can improve. There's nothing wrong with improving. So the big through line of understanding these social norms and understanding how you exist in the world is knowing that you have a bias, knowing that that is okay, but what is not okay is perpetrating the negative ones. A really common one in our society are differences based on gender or gender expression. There's one that I couldn't find. This was the quickest link that I could find. Oh, that was the same. Are you aware of your biases? Another term that gets thrown around a lot when you think about how you exist in this world is privilege. Level of privilege, whether that's based on your race, based on your gender expression, based on your the communities that you run with. There are levels of privilege in the world. I'm sure you can think while I'm talking of experiences that you've had comparing to a different gender expression or however. You two are going to react differently to different things because of different varying levels of privilege. I, for example, have grown up male, so I come with male privilege. It is just something that you should acknowledge. It is not a negative thing to have this. The negative parts come from when the assumptions start getting made. And that's the important part that I want you guys to be aware of. By becoming aware, like in my case, of my male privilege, I can understand that the way that I want to respond first might not be conducive to people of other gender expressions, or it might not be conducive to healthy conversations. Hi, thank you. It might not be conducive to healthy conversations in workplaces, in personal relationships with myself, because remember, when you think you're conversing with yourself, by identifying that there are disproportionate gaps between gender expressions, between different sexual orientations, between different things of that nature, you become a more effective communicator. And that's going to be the consistent theme among a lot of these links that I'm showing off for you guys. And you're welcome to read more in detail. But gender differences are a huge thing that you want to be paying attention to because they influence a majority of our world. Another one I want to touch on, it's another ism, ableism. This is related to your ability, whether that's your physical ability, your mental ability, your social ability. These are things that you need to be aware of because there are some terms, which we'll get into here in a second, that I'm not going to say directly. If you were assuming I was going to say a slur, it's obviously not. But we're going to call, they're called microaggressions. So we'll get into that here in just a second. There are a lot of very common ableist microaggressions that are things you want to avoid. Any type of metaphor or type of thing that you've heard, expression that relates to someone's ability, like for example, turning a blind eye, falling on deaf ears. Those are two ones that I've heard pretty frequently and have used in my life, and now understand that those are not super, super awesome things to say, making the blind and deaf communities an emphasis of lesser. It's not my intention. Obviously, I would not do that. But the power of the world and the language that we exist in allowed me to without realizing it. That's the unconscious part. So these links have a lot of cool definitions of ableism. There's a couple different tiers of ableism. And then here's where these resources get really, really important for the purposes of communicating. These are going to be those examples, similar to small talk, of how language and how assumptions and biases can create negative environments in the world that you live in, right? These are some things called microaggressions. If we break down that word micro, it's very small, very unnoticeable for the most time, but aggressions are going to be assumptions that are going to be in some type of negative direction, right? Again, it's just approaching communicating in the world by being aware that your life that you've lived is not the only way that people have approached it. Different people have had more challenge, different people have had less challenge. There's ranges of this human experience that we share, and understanding that will make you a little bit more worldly, a little bit more aware, and just generally a more empathetic person. Tips on how to avoid it. Inclusion is laws, especially one on ableism. If anyone tells you that they cannot provide something that is related to your needs, there is laws that protect things like that. So it's important to understand that as well. Another very common form of microaggressions are racial. So the same way, remember, this is something that is going to be, it could be a little bit uncomfortable. So just understand that going in. Same thing with ableism. Microaggressions are those things where it's just little things that we've experienced in our day-to-day that maybe you don't realize the weight that they carry. And so what I've done here is found two different lists of microaggressions, specifically focused on race. This one has a little bit more on gender expression, sexuality, and gender binary. Or there's more than the gender binary, but like, I'll talk about that more here in a second. The cool part about these resources is that they give you a theme of some context of when this might be said, the actual microaggressions themselves, and then the messages that those carry. This is that unconscious part right here. This is the part that is the dangerous thing about microaggressions. So a lot of these are pretty heavy reads because they are almost always used in a negative manner. And the reason I show these to you is so that you can be aware of them, seek them out, and also call people out when they use them, because now you have the context and the knowledge of how they exist in this world. So this first link has an example of specifically racial microaggressions with a theme, the actual aggression, and then what that message carries, that secret part, the unconscious message. This one has a combination of gender, racial, and sexual orientation microaggressions. And what I want you guys to do, peruse through these as comfortable as you are. It's just not something that you're required to do. If it gets uncomfortable, that is okay. You can always leave. So I'll just leave it at that. You guys understand. But read these. They are things that you maybe weren't aware of and something that you can change as of today. That's why I emphasize that this is not a personal conversation, or not a conversation, but not a personal attack or me explaining why I am better than you or you are better than me or anybody's better than anybody else. It's giving you context and awareness of the great wide world that we live in so that you guys can take the most advantage of it and associate yourself with people who don't do things like these. These are not good. So I'll wrap this up. Your job for today is to consider with patience how you can be aware of these concepts in all of your future conversations. It's going to take more than one day. We've talked for maybe 10 minutes. It's going to take more than that to unpack the life that you've lived so far. Not everything has to be guilt either. There's beauty in the life that you've lived already, but there's also a world around you that benefits from raising some groups and pushing down other groups. So what I want you to do is consider with patience how you can be aware of these concepts in all of your future conversations. Personal conversations, professional conversations, private conversations with yourself, etc.
Yes. What do you mean by raising some groups and putting down some?
Just historically speaking, there's been lots of oppression through human history based on what's the word? Assumed superiority. Like if one group thinks they're better than the other, they'll push that other group down. And so just as nature of human history, the world that we've lived in, that's something that you should be aware of and be careful of in your future conversations. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Next thing on your job is to take the time and to do the work to unlearn some of these negative thought patterns. This is the uncomfortable part. But again, I want to emphasize, you are a product of your environment, but you can rise above that. If you find yourself in scenes, in communities that are using some of these more negative things that I've brought some light to, or not brought some light to, but I have shown you today, think about that. Take some time to kind of wrestle with that. Feel that out a little bit. Do that work. A lot of growing happens right at the edge of your comfort zone. And that's where a lot of beauty of life comes in. So take some time, do some work, unlearn your negative thought patterns. We all have them. It is okay. It's just recognizing them and replacing them with something a little bit more positive or productive. And then finally, I mentioned it right at the start of the day, understand that because something is a norm, it does not make it right nor okay. So for example, some of those languages that are a little bit ableistic, just because those are things that are said every day does not make them okay. They just become accepted. A norm does not mean a benefit. It just means a generally accepted situation. Okay? That's your job for today. Just kind of think, reflect. This is all I need from you today. There's lots of reading if you would like some more reading. If you have any comments for me, you can Canvas message me. Those are always confidential. You can catch me after class if you want to chat some more. Give me feedback on what you think. Whatever. Does all this make sense? Cool. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate you actively tuning in. I didn't see as many phones as usual, which is good. And then that's all I have for you today. Just think about this. Before I go, last thing I want to emphasize, it's not personal. It is uncomfortable, and that is okay. If you're doing something for the right reason, that's what matters. That's the important part. Cool. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. The rest of this time is yours.